Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to get the opportunity to share with you something that's actually really quite new and still in train, and it's the Schools Provision for Students' Wellbeing project. This was a project that was set up between the Inspectorate and participating schools at both primary and post-primary level to look at what was happening in schools in terms of meeting the needs and developing students' well-being skills. The context for the project was really, it grew out of an action under the anti-bullying strategy, which asked us as an inspectorate to look at how we could develop an evaluation framework that we could use by both schools and ourselves to report on the quality of schools provision. And that was the basic aim of the project initially. So as we did some research in the Inspectorate, we realised that perhaps the place to start wasn't really with inspecting what schools do, but actually talking to schools to learn a little bit about their context. And so we invited a number of schools. In total, it will be 15 primary and 15 post-primary schools selected relatively at random. I'll talk about that in a moment. They were schools which our experience told us we could learn a lot from across the country in a variety of sectors and circumstances. So we asked them if they would join us in a research project. So we were not going to be evaluating, we were going to be learning with and from those schools. We wanted them to help us and themselves to reflect on those aspects of their provision that they believe contribute to their pupils' well-being. We also wanted to ask them about how those aspects of their provision are functioning to support the well-being. And we also wanted to ask the students and the parents what their perceptions of school support for well-being were. So they were the three kind of questions that we were going to work with schools on. It was a new way for us to work with schools because we had to learn not to be inspectors. And that was a bit of a challenge. So it's a very small team of us who worked together to really try and take off the inspection hat and go to visit schools with an openness to learning. But schools are very busy places, so you can't just, even with the best will in the world, arrive on the doorstep and say, talk to us about. We needed some kind of shape or organising principle to focus the discussion so that it was worthwhile for us and for the schools. So I'm going to just speak very quickly about the kind of context, but I won't labour it because you've already heard it from the three speakers this morning in which schools are working. And one of the things we learned very early on was that actually there is an enormous amount of regulation and guidance and guidelines out there which really describe the space, the well-being space within which schools are expected to work. And they include things like SPHE, for example, as a curriculum input. There's a whole load of NEPS documents that are there to help schools to identify and manage, for example, behavioural and emotional and social difficulties, to promote well-being in both post-primary schools and since the project began in primary schools. The action planning on bullying is there, Get Active programme. So there's a whole load of stuff out there that describes this space. So we started from the premise that schools already are acutely aware of both their role and their responsibilities in terms of developing the well-being of the children in their care. And we moved very quickly then to say, well, let's actually ask about how that's done. So our project really developed in two phases. The first phase was a research-based in-house phase where we looked at a huge amount of the research literature. And the second phase then was the in-school work, which actually began in the 2014-15 school year and will finish at Christmas this year. Our methodology basically was, arising out of our review, we developed a definition of well-being in schools. And I'm very grateful to the support we got from our colleagues in NEPS in arriving at that definition. And we also developed a framework to guide the conversation that we would have with schools. And we wanted to test both the definition and the framework when we went in to work with schools. So what was the definition? There it is. Wellbeing in the context of schools may be defined as the presence of a culture, ethos and environment which promotes dynamic, optimal development and flourishing for all in the school community. It encompasses the domains of relationship, meaning, emotion, motivation, purpose and achievement. It includes quality teaching and learning for the development of all elements related to healthy living, whether academic, social or emotional, with a particular emphasis on self-efficacy, resilience and coping. As inspectors, we don't say it in 2 or 3 words. And to be honest, that definition was what I call the catch-all. We didn't want to leave anything out, and the definition was to be tested by the project. And there's the framework that we came up with. And basically, what the research literature told us was that actually the school environment, including aspects of school leadership, school culture, the classroom climate, and provision in the school for specific targeted student supports, was a key area in which the well-being of children is developed, protected. The school curriculum itself is important, including access to the curriculum, the co-curricular and extracurricular program, and then the quality of the learning experiences. And finally, that partnerships would be something we should look at. Partnerships which begin, first of all, with clear communication, but which stretch to include student engagement, parental involvement, and community links. So basically, that's what we took to schools, this definition and the framework. How did it work? Well, we had a preliminary visit to the schools. First of all, we rang principals, God help them. I rang them, and because principals are very busy, they got a message either on their answer machine or if they were lucky and they had a school administrator or secretary. Suzanne Dillon from the inspectorate rang you. She left her number. After the first call, I realised it was very important that when I rang, I said, and tell them it's not about an inspection. It was very important to do that. Anyway, we went out and we rang and asked schools, and we asked them to think about it. And when schools accepted the invitation, as actually every school did, we went to the school and we said to them, look, here's our definition, here's our framework. How do you think we should do this? We believe we should go into at least visit classrooms, because that's where children spend most of their time in school. So if we're going to talk about school provision for children's well-being, we need to be in the classrooms. We also want to talk to the students, and we need to access their sense of what's happening in the school and their parents' sense. So we're going to use questionnaires and interviews to do that. But schools themselves told us we needed to talk to other people. In some schools, depending on the circumstance of the school, they said, you need to talk to the local child and adolescent mental health service with whom we engage very closely. You need to have a chat with our liaison person there. Others said, you really need to talk to the JLO with An Garda Síochána, because she is very heavily engaged in working with our school, etc. So we asked the schools to tell us who we should talk to learn about them. We also asked them to do a little bit of self-reflection before we arrived, and they did that. We're civil servants, we provided them with a form, you know, the usual. But they did that, and they provided us with some very good advance information. And then we spent 2 days in the school doing what it was we had agreed to do with the principal and the teachers. And you can see on the slide there the selection of activities we engaged in. Now, because it isn't an evaluation, there is no report. We're not evaluating, we're not going to make statements about how well schools were doing as individuals. Our aim was to answer the 3 questions. What are schools doing? How effective do they perceive their actions to be? And what do parents and children think? And because it was a research and a learning experience, as we moved through the project, we realized that actually, rather than arriving at an evaluation framework, an inspection framework, what we could arrive at was something that somebody asked about earlier this morning, we could probably identify really, really good practice and share that with the full academic community. And that's probably what the end product of this project is going to be, a research report which sets out the context and which gives exemplars of what schools are doing and how effective they are. Now, I'm conscious of my time, so I'm going to very quickly go through some of the learning. And I have to give a little health warning with this. The project is still ongoing, so we are still gathering data. We are still visiting schools right up to Christmas. So what did the schools say? I was overwhelmed that once they got over the business that I wasn't ringing to tell them I was coming to inspect, without exception, every single school principal that I spoke to, it wasn't a quick, can I ask you to think of something and could I send you an explanatory leaflet and maybe you talk about it with your staff and come back. It was like a half an hour discussion because they were so enthused at the notion that the department was going to engage with them around wellbeing. So there was a great warm welcome for this project. They identified through the project a number of challenges which you've already heard about, but I want to just repeat them because they have come through in our work with schools too. The increasing number of students, and I'm using the word student there for both primary and post-primary, so the increasing number of students from families experiencing the negative effects of recession and austerity are posing challenges in schools. The growth in non-traditional family structures, an increase in the number of students attending school with emotional difficulties, issues around drug and alcohol use, and unfortunately not restricted at post-primary level, but actually in some of the primary schools that we've worked with also. The negative effects of student engagement with social media. And what they meant was not that student engagement is all negative, it was the negative effects that were causing challenges. The negative impact on the moratorium on posts in building the capacity of the school to respond, and the challenge posed by the guidance allocation changes. And you've heard about those this morning. And another one that when we asked them at the end of the project to reflect, their engagement, to reflect about what they learned, a strong message that came across from schools was there's a real challenge to school leadership to ensure coherence between the support, academic and administrative systems in the school. So, and I'll come back to that in a little while and explain what I think they meant, but I have to check that with the schools. So what do parents say? Thus far, we have just under 1,000 post-primary parents, just over 1,000 primary parents, so about 2,000 parents. We gave the parents questionnaires, and the questionnaires had 34 to 35 items on it, and they asked about schools provision, but they also asked the parents for their perception of how their children were doing in school and how happy their children were too. So we actually found that there was a very high level of parental satisfaction with these things that schools were doing to support children. I hope you can read the slide. All those percentages will eventually arrive in the report. But basically the core message is that the majority of parents are very happy that their children are making good social, behavioural and emotional progress in schools. They also are pretty satisfied that schools help their children to mature and to take on responsibility. And what was interesting was that the vast majority felt that children get on well with the staff in the school and with the other children in the school. And what was really important was that they know where to go to ask for help when they need it. They agreed that there's a range of inputs provided. So, in fact, it was very interesting. 100% of primary parents said that their children make healthy choices when it comes to food. The percentages here in terms of the inputs that the school has in place to support children, the parental perceptions differ from the student perceptions. And that may well be because you know the way children can be involved in things in school and just not bother telling their folks about it. So, and particularly at post-primary. So we find that 17% of post-primary parents knew that their child took part in an extracurricular activity. That's not to say that the other 83%, no, they don't. In fact, there was a high, I'm not sure, response to that particular question. But it was very, very interesting. The stats for my school helps my child to make healthy decisions about drugs, these are the people who said they didn't agree. So about 28% of primary parents weren't happy that the school is providing sufficient information to their children. When we mined into that with groups of parents, however, we found that we had to differentiate for this statistic at the level of the age of the child. Because obviously, if you have parents of younger children, it isn't appropriate. There's an age-appropriate point at which primary schools engage. So those statistics come with strong health warnings and really need to be interpreted. And I'm showing them to you just to give you a sense of how we engaged with parents. I suppose the key message that would come across is that parents actually really were very happy that there were a lot of initiatives going on in schools and that their children felt safe and cared for in school. And when we asked the students, and we had about close to 2,500 students, and it's growing, most of them focused in on what became very clear to us as the project developed to be key factors in their perception of their well-being in school. And the first was relationships, and that's not going to be news to you. And actually, the presentations this morning keyed this up really well. We learned through our engagement with schools and through our conversations with teachers, parents, principals and students that actually the most important thing is the relationship that are established in the schools. And not just the relationships between the child and the teacher, but teacher-teacher, teacher-senior management relationships, school-parent relationships. They are actually core, and children pick those up by osmosis. So you can have wonderful structures in place, and if the relationships are not functioning well, the children pick that up. So most of the children felt that they were very well supported in making friends and settling in and being encouraged to participate in groups of people who do things together. And they also felt strongly that they were treated fairly and equitably in school. In terms of efficacy, we asked them for their perception about their ability to have an effect, to make things happen. And what was really interesting was that there was, again, almost a quarter of post-primary students who didn't feel that they could do things as well as other people their own age. So who lacked confidence in their own abilities. And 70% of post-primary and 73% of primary children didn't have a great sense of their ability to actually fix their own problems. They need help, yeah. And in terms of their ability to influence what happens in school, well, the statistics there are interesting. So there's a lot of really good work that's actually happening in schools, and I'm going to summarize it very quickly in terms of what we found standing back and looking at it. Where schools have a shared vision and a plan for promoting and enhancing and sustaining the well-being of students, we found much more positive responses from parents and students and staff. Where they attend to the provision of staff training and resources. And in fact, we found schools were doing heroic work with very limited resources. And it wasn't at all uncommon in the schools that we went to that they actually sourced funding independently in order to provide training and counselling or to access counselling services for children in their schools. Where they had relevant procedures in place, and here we're talking about building on the really good work done around support teams by NEPs, and that notion of the all, the some, the many, and the few. And realising that there was the other thing we found was that while schools might be really good at a whole school level, and we went to some really wonderful places, and they were really good at a whole school level, thinking and talking about well-being, but it was a challenge to bring that back into the individual classroom. So they were very conscious of relationships and supporting students and warm school climates around the school as a whole. But when they went into the classroom, they were teaching. And this was a particular issue at post-primary, and we've already spoken about the dominance of that subject mindset. What was interesting is that we came across lots of examples of really good subject teachers doing really good work, but they didn't know they were doing it. And the other thing that we found was there's a very heavy reliance on visionary and energetic leaders, and we wondered how sustainable that is. It's about making sure that leadership is built beyond just the senior management team in the school, that there's some way of devolving that and involving people more widely. Now, there's lots more I could say, and I will be saying it in the report, which we'll issue next summer, please God. But that's a whistle-stop tour. My final word really is that we're finding schools are doing some really good work. They don't know they're doing it sometimes. And that lack of consciousness may well be impacting their efficacy in doing it, if you understand what I mean by that. So they're doing good stuff. They'd probably do better if they knew how well they were doing. Anyway, thank you very much.